I am going to get started. For those of you that are coming in, you probably have already seen this. We will be recording this session today and putting it up on the University of Manitoba Library's YouTube channel. It takes me a little bit of time to do that, so it might be available next week if you'd like to check out the channel. My name is Carol Cooke, and I am a health sciences librarian here at the Neil John Maclean Health Sciences Library, and you are attending Citation Tracking, an alternative to literature searching. I'm joined by my colleague, Carolyn Monnin. She's going to be looking after the chat and putting in a bunch of links. And please, at this time, feel free to put in any questions you have in the chat if you'd like. And Carolyn can answer them on the fly, or if she'd like me to stop and answer the question, I'm happy to do that as they occur to you. So again, please feel free to use the chat, and we look forward to a very dynamic chat, hopefully today. So today you're going to find the links to the resources and tools for this workshop on our library guide. Carolyn's going to put that into the chat so that you can follow along and use that resource. And at the end of the workshop, I'll certainly happy to send out that link if you'd like to do that as well. Okay. So you're a researcher and you need some information quickly. So you go to your favorite search database. This could be Google, could be whatever. Type in a few relevant keywords and start skimming titles and abstracts. The problem is you're never too sure about the completeness of the results that you get. To get complete results, you need to do a well-developed literature search, something that I consider to be a traditional literature search, where you're going and you're entering a few keywords into a relevant subject database, getting results, and then skimming them. However, it can take a little bit of time to do that, and this process can require a certain level of expertise and testing of search strategies to see if you're getting the right results. So this may be a bit of a problem for you. We think the answer to this problem is citation tracking. So the idea behind citation tracking is that you use the few relevant articles that you found in your initial search that were really on topic, and use those and employ citation tracking to help you discover more relevant articles. So in this session, I'm hoping to get you to a place where you feel like you understand the concepts of forward, backward, and co-citation relationships with regards to the documents or key documents that you're looking at. I hope that you will have a deeper understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of the citation tracking methodology, and recognize when you should be using it and when you should maybe be using other methods to find materials. And at a bare minimum, I would like you to be able to conduct citation tracking in Scopus, Google Scholar, and Web of Science, which are the key databases that we have at the University of Manitoba that allow you to do this sort of thing. And at the very end, if we have time, I would really like to look at literature mapping tools like LitMaps, ResearchRabbit. You may have heard of Connected Papers, but there's a new one, an AI tool called Elicit, that I think would be particularly interesting in this context. So citation tracking is, think about as a researcher, when you cite or reference a paper in your bibliography, you typically cite sources that directly relate to your topic, right? This means that by tracking those citations, we as scholars who are looking at your work are finding more relevant papers on the research topic that we're interested in. So you've probably already done citation tracking without really knowing what to call it. This is when you check references in a paper to follow a particular thought or idea. But this process may be known as many other names, some of which may be more familiar and some not. Now, as a method, citation tracking is a continuous iterative process, gathering, searching, scanning, and aggregating references. Its foundation is based on the relationships between the articles or materials that we're looking at. And these relationships, I'm going to kind of call them backwards, forwards, and co-citation. And I'll explain what those are in a bit. Another relationship that you will see popping up in a lot of the databases that we have access to and subscribe to at the University of Manitoba is this concept of related articles. And I'm going to delve into that relationship a little bit as well for a variety of reasons that will be obvious a little bit more later. However, all of these relationships start with a key paper or papers. So one thing that you're really interested in following up on and trying to find more relevant materials on. So what makes them key or not is whether or not they're right on your topic. You know, sometimes a professor will say to you, or an advisor or a teammate will say, that paper, you must read that paper. It is the paper on this topic. It's perfect. You have to read it. You can use that as a foundation for citation tracking. So it's pretty routine to look at references inside of a paper to either follow an idea or discover new and relevant articles on your topic of interest. I'm calling this backwards citation tracking and include looking at reference lists for your key paper, bibliography, or footnotes. Something like another level or another layer on this is taking you from your key paper backwards in publication time. So you're looking at older materials, okay? So that's really important to consider when you're doing this kind of citation tracking. Less routine is forward citation tracking, where you look to see who has actually cited that particular key paper. This takes you forward in publication time. So it helps you to identify those papers that either support, refute, or build on the concepts and ideas in that original key paper. I really like doing forward citation tracking because it gives you an opportunity to see how things have changed over time. So we know that to check references, but as we go forward in time, in publication time, you can see how idea or thinking around a particular idea or concept has changed throughout time. Now, co-citation, that relationship is a little bit more complicated to understand, and it's taken me a while to wrap my head around it. So if it's kind of weird for you, don't worry about it. Hopefully this slide will be helpful. So co-citation analysis is a little bit different. It typically starts with between 2 to 4 key papers and their references. And this is where it gets a little bit fun. So here you've got 2 papers that share a single reference. So this paper and this paper share this particular reference right. Okay, so here, we're definitely interested in the fact that, hey, this reference is now way more important to us than these other references. But this paper at the bottom, we might want to look at that because it's referencing the exact same, okay? Now, if you think about it, you have one paper. What if you have one paper that shares 2 references with another paper? Or a paper that shares 3 references with another paper? Then they become much more interesting because it indicates a certain degree of commonality or a greater or tighter relationship. So the references themselves are considered co-citations. These papers are considered co-citing papers. And when you do a co-citation analysis, you may be finding co-citing papers, or you may be finding these co-cited papers or co-citations. So that process surfaces those things, and it kind of, tools like that look at this sort of thing will often rank things. So it helps you to prioritize what you are looking at. And this is the part that I find really fascinating, and I think is really the future of citation tracking. It's the most interesting part, but it's also the hardest to get at. Now, the last relationship I want to talk about is this idea of relatedness. Now, more and more databases, like I said, are offering this related papers feature. They too start off with a key paper. How these papers, though, are related to each other can be a bit of a mystery. So in some cases, they might have similar keywords or subject headings to the key paper. In other databases, they might be looking at those papers which share references, like in co-citation. So you have to question what is actually happening in your database of choice. What does related mean in that database? And by looking at database help, you can kind of get an idea of exactly what's going on. But it's also a very interesting relationship to consider when you're thinking about citation tracking. So that's kind of like the foundation of what I'm talking about today. Does anybody have any? All right. So let's talk a little bit about some of the strengths and weaknesses for this. As far as strengths go, some researchers have said that it's faster, that you get a rapid identification of relevant citations, and it helps you to get a view of a citation network. So a grouping or a cluster of papers on a particular idea. Another real strength of this particular method is that you're not limited by keywords or indexing. We know that when we search and we do a traditional library search, we try and find synonymous terms for just about all the keywords we have in our searching, right? So that we can create something that's fairly complete. This is not tied to keyword or subject indexing. So its relationship to the papers that we're interested in is really based on relevancy. So I think it's just a little more relevant. The citation relationship is neutral. So when we're first looking at it, we don't understand how they're connected. We understand they are connected. We don't understand why they're connected. So are they refuting? Are they supporting? Are they, what's going on in that relationship? So we have to read deeper to figure out why that connection was made and how it's relevant. But it's a strength. That neutrality is a bit of a strength, I think. The weakness is that it requires good key papers. If all you have is a paper that is kind of tangentially interesting to your topic, it's going to send you off in all kinds of crazy directions, and it's not worth the effort in that case. It really you need to be able to look at the paper and say, this directly addresses my research interest. And then that's what makes a good key paper. It also relies on a really good citation culture. Carolyn and I are from the health sciences, and use of articles is rich. We have an amazing citation culture in the health sciences. It's incredibly rich. But there are other subject areas where it's just not the same, or they rely predominantly on book citations, which a lot of the citation tracking tools just don't deal with. It relies on currency, accuracy, and completeness of the database used. So you are limited by what the database covers, and how much it covers and how current it is. Yeah, it's time dependent too. So if you're trying to do a citation analysis of something that was published in 2022, how likely is it that it's actually had someone citing it? Like, only the really big ones probably have gained citations since then. So it's kind of hard to do that. So when you're looking for something to do citation tracking with, you want it to be almost a little older than the last 2 years. So it's a good kind of like a timeline to think about. We call this linking lag. It just takes a little bit of time for it to work its way through the scholarly work and research. And other researchers say that this is just too time consuming and it's not worth your effort. So like all things, I guess it would depend on your question, depend on the type of research you're doing, what you're using it for, whether or not this particular methodology is going to be useful for you. Some would also argue that since we cite the things largely that support our work, there might be a potential for bias. So yes, you can find a lot of really relevant articles quickly that are supporting your work, but what if you want to look at something that maybe refutes it? It may not be that easy using this particular process, unless you find an article that refutes your work and then do citation tracking with that. So that's another possibility. And like I said, it's not ideal for book citations. It's also not reproducible, so it makes it somewhat challenging as a tool to stand on its own for systematic reviews, scoping reviews, and other types of knowledge synthesis work. So that's why it's always seen as a supplementary search process, because you can't reproduce it. Citations are always being added and changing. So you can't, look at a particular point in time. So when would you use it? And we're going to look at some specific use cases here. The first one is when there's very little literature on a topic. I did a very rare, someone had a rare defect that they were interested in looking at called uterine didelphys, which is a weird thing. And it's so rare that there's extremely little literature on the topic, very little. But I was able to take the 1 or 2 papers I could find and very carefully expand it into a collection of about 20 articles on the topic. And it was great for the researcher that it was providing some assistance to. So it's really good for things that are kind of really hard to find and track down. For areas that require some complex searching, now, if you think about it, when you're looking at things like mixed methods or qualitative research, and you're trying to get at things like experience, sometimes that is something else that you have to think about. Maybe this is a better way to follow qualitative research in your area. Also, areas with poorly defined terminology or those with overlapping terminology. So if you think of my own field in the health sciences, if I do a search on systematic reviews, I'm going to get every systematic review known to mankind, and the methodological papers that I'm interested in are going to be buried. So if I follow a methodological paper that I know and like, I'm more likely to find more methodological papers on systematic reviews. So in that case, it's a case of overlapping terminology. But anything that's a methodological topic, like I was talking about with systematic reviews, it's a great tool to use when you do have those 1 to 3 key papers. And I think it's a really good supplement to a standard literature search. I would argue that in certain circumstances, though, it could be used to supplant a standard literature search, especially if you're writing a narrative review, especially if you're doing it for like the background section to a protocol or a systematic review or your thesis where you're looking at providing support to the way you're thinking. This might be better, perhaps, than your standard literature review. It's great because you can take a keyword search and compensate for inexpert search skills. So if you're not confident in your search skills, this is a great way to kind of combat that. And it's also being used in knowledge synthesis like systematic reviews and scoping reviews as an alternate term or alternate methodology to help you locate more relevant papers. Carolyn and I use it to help us develop search terms. We use it to help us test out search strategies against gold standard lists that we've developed through citation tracking. So we use it in a variety of ways when we're participating in knowledge synthesis. So questions about any of that? Okay, so the tools. So the big ones that I want to talk about are Scopus and Web of Science because the University of Manitoba subscribes to them. And the reason why I want to surface these so much is not only the fact that we pay for them, but I think the citation tracking portion of these tools are the things that people don't necessarily use them for, and I think they're really underutilized. Google Scholar you have free access to, but you might not think of it as something that allows you to do citation tracking, so I want to surface that. And this little weird kind of throwaway here, Dimensions AI, it has AI in it, but basically it's a data set of, it's not really AI, although it may be enhanced by using AI. It's a data set that allows you to do some citation tracking as well. I would also maybe add in here Semantic Scholar as well, but I'm not going to really focus on those ones today. So with Scopus you can do backwards, forwards, and related citation tracking, but it's with a little bit of a difference. So with Scopus, it shows citing papers, also known as cited by. So these are those upper level, if you think about, those are papers that cite your key article. And it can be found on the main results page and on the individual record page. And these citing papers can be saved to the Scopus My List, which is something that I really like about Scopus, is you can actually take those citations and save them into My List. And it helps you, if you're using like a citation management software, to create a list that you can then download and use. References for a paper are only shown on the individual record page, as you'll see shortly, but they can be exported, although rather oddly not saved to My List. So I don't know why Scopus does this. I find it very weird, but that happens. And sometimes I've noticed that when I compare the original article to what's in Scopus, I might not have all of the references, and that's something to keep in mind. So you might want to double check. The related documents is interesting, and it retrieves other documents which share either references with the co-citing with the document. So these are co-citing papers. So those are the ones that I said I found particularly interesting. Or they might have shared keywords, or they might have the same author. You get to pick and be very intentional about which lens you want to look through those related documents with. And again, I think that's really fascinating. So how it works is you can go into Scopus if you want, and you can follow this along. If you have identified a paper that you're working with, that you want to do this with, feel free to just throw it in there. Basically what you're doing is you are popping in an article title. So you can either copy and paste an article title, or you can just type the article title in, change this little drop down here from author title, what is it? Title abstract keywords, I think, right, Carolyn? Change it from that to article title, and that'll help. And then add in another search string and select authors, and maybe pick the last name of the first author to include. And this will kind of surface your content a little bit faster. From here, I've done the search. I've clicked on the title of the article that I'm interested in, and here's where I find the documents that go forward in publication time from this original document. So these are the citing documents. And then if I scroll a little bit down further, I will be able to get to a reference list just a little further down. And I can also scroll for related documents. So I'm gonna just go into my Scopus just because I want to capture something here, and I want to show you that lens piece. So I'm going to put in 10 simple rules for writing a literature review, and I'm going to this is the article title. I'm going to add search field here, and I'm going to change that to the authors. And I'm going to, the author that I'm interested in here is Pautasso. And I'm going to run my search. Feel free to do the searching that you want to do, or you can follow along with me. So here I have, actually, oddly enough, two options. It looks like it's been published twice, one in a non-English journal, or in French and English. I'm going to use this one, and you have the option of clicking on this to see how many people see the articles who've cited it, but I would suggest that you click on the title of the article, that's your key article, and from here, my computer's very, very slow today, so apologies in advance. And you see the references coming up as it's loading here. So it's got 33 references according to this. Now, if I scroll down a little bit, here's my related documents for this. And what it is doing now, it is surfacing content that is co-cited. Sorry. There we go. So this first lens is co-cited materials, okay? Then you can pick to look at more by this author, or you can pick by relatedness, looking at keywords. I think this one, the default one, is the one that's the most interesting. So if you wanted to look at co-citations, this is where you would look in Scopus.
Carol, we have a question. Is this more of a refined searching?
I think that it's just a different methodology. So if you're looking at completeness, the traditional literature search still stands up. But if you're trying to follow a thought, a theme, or idea, or find supporting evidence, I think this is a much more focused methodology. And I think looking at cited is at who is citing this key paper is great. Looking at the references is great. But I think what's really interesting is what is not often surfaced, which is that co-citation. So that's why I would also really find these documents in here interesting and want to have a look at them. So it's another lens. I hope that helps. Yeah, the number of citations can be quite large using this method. So it's one of those ones where you're not worried about doing this necessarily systematically. You're worrying about using it for discovery, right? So you're being very specific and intentional about those resources that you're actually looking at. And you can kind of eliminate things. You know, as a researcher, what your topic is. You can eliminate things really quickly just by looking at title very often, right? So that will help you reduce those rather sensitively. And with co-citation, it's a matter of, in this case, in Scopus, they're ranked. So the ones that are more closely cited are going to be towards the top of the list. So you can kind of, it's almost ranking for you, things that you should be paying attention to. So hopefully that's helpful. So that's Scopus. So Web of Science, it too does backwards and forwards and related citation tracking. It's another one of those databases. It searches because what Scopus is Elsevier, Web of Science is Wolters Kluwer. So they're two competing publishers and vendors, and they don't want to have the exact same content, although they have to have the standard content, so there's going to be some overlap. But there's enough unique content that you kind of have to search both if you're doing citation tracking. Again, it depends. So Web of Science shows citing papers, that's what it's calling them, as citing articles in two locations, main results page and the main on the individual record page as well. These citing papers can be saved to the Web of Science marked list rate or exported, which I love. It's much more easy, I think, than Scopus. References for a paper are shown only on the individual record page, and they're called cited references. So the language used to refer to these things can be a little bit confusing, and you have to kind of know what it's looking at. So in this case, they can be saved to a MARC list and exported. And I think, like I said, it's a little better than Scopus because of that. Now, I have noticed that, again, in this one, sometimes there's some incomplete citation information. So you might have to do some digging to try and fill out those citations. As far as related records retrieves, and I'm going to quote, and it's a little bit long, so relax a little bit. A list of records that cite at least one document cited by the parent record, identified at the top of the page. Related records are ranked according to the number of references they share with the parent record. So the assumption behind related records searching is that articles that cite the same works have a subject relationship, regardless of whether or not their titles, abstracts, or keywords contain the same terms. The more cited references two articles share, the closer the subject relationship. And that's from like the Web of Science help. And I thought it was a very elegant way of referring to how they are using their related part of their references. So how this works in Web of Science is you have something that looks very similar. You can do a cited references search, or very similar to what we did in Scopus. You can look at documents. You just have to make sure that you, again, pick the author's last name and then the title. So same thing. From here, I've clicked on an article record. I can find all the citing documents here. And then this is their reference list. I know for a fact that this particular article has 10 references. So it's like, 9? I don't know what's going on there. And then this is where you get the related records. The related records aren't actually displayed. You have to click on related records to dive into them. So as I'm kind of working through this next example, if you have another paper, feel free to try out Web of Science. I'm going to try with something, let's see. I'm going to try it with plain language summaries of research. Let's see if I go here. And I go into my Web of Science. You can get to all of these from the databases, libraries, databases, A to Z listing. I'm just going through the Neil John McLean page. That's because I'm very familiar with it. But if you go to University of Manitoba Libraries, click on databases A to Z, you can find them alphabetically by their title. And Carolyn, thanks for popping those into the chat. So if you want to follow along, there's a direct link into Web of Science there. And oh boy, everybody might be searching. It might be protesting because so many of us are trying to access it at the same time. It's supposed to be very broad. Our license is supposed to allow us to do multiple users, but sometimes it gets bogged down the more people are looking at it. So I might not be able to show it today. But we'll give it another couple seconds, and then we'll move on. Okay, I'm moving on. But again, just like I suggested in here, click on View Related Records to get those co-citations, to get that co-citation analysis, okay? When you do a search, click on the title of your key paper to get to the individual page, and then click on View Related Records, and that's how you get in there, okay? All right, so Google Scholar, which should be a whole lot friendlier to us. It does forwards, it does not do backwards. citation tracking, and it also does related citation tracking, which I find kind of interesting. So it shows citing papers as cited by, and this is listed at the bottom of each result. So you've gone into Google Scholar, you've done your search, and you've just merrily gone along picking the papers that you're interested in, but you may not have noticed that there's a cited by down underneath it that you should also be paying attention to. Now, you can't really add these to a list like you can in Scopus and Web of Science, but they can be exported if you have a citation management software and its associated web browser plugin. So that being said, it's not uncommon for citations found in Google Scholar to be incomplete, so be sure to check them. And in addition, cited by can retrieve duplicates. So you might see the same thing more than once. There's not a lot of quality control. And you can't, other than going into the original paper and looking at references, there's no like list of references that you can use. Related articles retrieves closely related works. And according to Google Scholar's help, it says that they're closely related. They don't tell how they're closely related. There's some sort of algorithm going on in the background. It's probably, we can speculate, that it's a combination of keyword frequency and co-occurrence and some sort of fancy algorithm. So you go into Google Scholar, do a search. Don't be afraid to put in the entire title of your paper. It surfaces it faster, brings it up more to the top. And then from there, just look at the bottom there. You probably never even noticed, cited by 11. And in some instances, I've noticed here in this area, it didn't show up for this, which is a bit weird. I've seen it show up Web of Science citations. And if you click on it and you have Lean Library browser extension included, it will sometimes send you through a pre-populated Web of Science search to get to those citations. And then you can kind of work through the process. So I found that relationship with Google Scholar kind of interesting and unexpected. So for something that is largely a paywalled database. So if you notice that, use it. It's very interesting and curious. And then there's that related articles. So if you click on that, it's going to give you a list of what it calls related articles. You can expect that as you work your way down through that list, the relevance is going to go down. So how deeply you go into any of these lists is entirely based on what you see in front of you. So if you do want to try it yourself, feel free to use the paper that you want to. And Carolyn, if you can pop the Google Scholar link into the chat, you can go into Google Scholar. I'm going to do a search for one of my favorite papers. So if you haven't read this and you're considering writing a literature review, Carolyn has her own favorites, but I'm going to hop in that. I like it. And it tells me it's cited by 136. There's related articles. And see, there's that Web of Science, that really interesting little Web of Science citations. So I could click on this and it's going to kind of help me navigate through to that part in Web of Science, which I find very interesting. And then you can explore. So in this context, related articles, the first one is always the article, your key article of interest. And then you can just kind of work your way down through here. So because this is about writing a paper, Taylor Double Emulsions maybe used it as a process paper. So you might run into that particular risk as well when you're looking at things. So who knows how these things are connected. All right. So, sorry, I'm trying to get back to there we go. Okay, any questions at this point about these tools that we're talking about? This is like perfect. I've got 15 minutes to have fun. Yep. Okay. All right. So,
yes. Excuse me, I have a question. Yes. I mean, if the Google Scholar has a citation for an article has a citation, what does that mean, that Web of Science? So it means we have lots of references to be finding in Web of Science as well?
it could just be that that reference is showing up in Web of Science, has been indexed in Web of Science so that it displays. So when it's not there, it might not have been in Web of Science. You might not have found it in Web of Science for the first example. So it just means that it's that citation is showing up in Web of Science, and they've found citations for people who have cited it.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Okay. So that co-citation piece is really, really interesting. Obviously, Scopus and Web of Science are behind paywalls, so getting at that content is really challenging. But what seems to be popping up is this interest in co-citations and co-citation analysis tools, and a bit more broadly, things that you could call literature mapping tools. So how do we surface those co-citations? And how do we make sense of them? How do we rank them? Because we can end up with a lot, obviously. So the literature mapping tools that I've kind of been exploring lately that I think are interesting are things like connected papers. And if you've used these tools, just pop into the chat which tool you've used. So I'm very curious to see, because the last time I did this, I had a couple of people who were using connected papers, and yeah, okay, I'm not surprised. Connected papers is an interesting tool. Insightful, LitMaps, ResearchRabbit, Local Citation Network, Citation Chaser, and Annotate, which is hysterical. Play on words, but for PubMed only, are all of these kinds of tools. Oh, Local Citation Network, cool. Very, very interested in that. So what I like, I've got this librarian that I follow, and his name is Aaron Tay, and he has been keeping an eye on these things for quite some time, at least the last three years or so. And he's got a list of these tools, and a lot of really great information about what he thinks is going on in the background and how they're being used. So I would encourage anyone who wants to kind of follow up on some of this and explore more. I wanted to look at LitMaps, largely because it's free. And I know that you can have like up to 5 graphs free with connected papers, but connected papers doesn't deal with co-citation piece, and that's the piece that fascinates me the most. Connected papers is all about keyword co-occurrence and the backwards and forwards citation connections. So those are the main things that connected papers works with. About, I guess, well, yeah, towards the end of 2021, up until then, Connected Papers was also able to do co-citation analysis very easily because it was building its data set on Microsoft Academic Graph, which it was a freely open and available data set that allowed full and complete citations, forwards and backwards. And it was taking that content and manipulating it and creating really nice co-citation graphs. And then in 2021, Microsoft Graph Academic decided to shut its doors. And poor old Connected Papers was kind of left out in the cold and only able to offer forwards, backwards citation mapping and some really creative related articles, graphics or related article algorithms. So with LitMaps, what you do is you create something known as a collection. So I'm going to kind of draw your attention to my AI in Libraries collection, because that's what's being displayed here. You create your collection, so you can hit the little plus new, and you can create a collection, and then you can add in the articles that you're interested in. You can do this in a couple of different ways. You can click on the Add Articles link, and it would allow you to search for them, or you can also take a set from like your citation manager in BibTeX, download it in BibTeX format, and you can import that into LitMaps. So from here, you can then, hang on, there we go. I wanted to make sure, there we go. So when I click on View as Map, that's what's happening in this next part, I get this. So these in the center here in light blue are all my key papers. And these ones is the first degree of separation from my key papers. So who has cited them and their citing article, and the articles that they've cited. So that's the first degree. For a fee, you can get, see, it's locked. I've got a little lock symbol here. I obviously haven't paid the fee. You can get a second degree, which is those co-citations. So that, for me, kind of pushes LitMaps over connected papers. But again, I don't like paying for things that I can get for free. So since I can look at co-citations in Scopus and Web of Science, I don't often use them. But what's nice about this is it gives you, if you look at this, you've got some papers that are a little smaller than other papers. It gives you a visual representation of the number of citations. And that might help you rank what you're looking at. With ResearchRabbit, it's very similar. So here I've done my AI in libraries. I've created a collection in ResearchRabbit, AI in libraries. I've added in papers. So just click here. I can search for them, or I can upload my citations into here. And then I have an option to explore papers here. So earlier work, which means their references, later work, which means who has cited these papers, and similar work, which is again based on keyword co-occurrence. It's not citation. That co-citation piece is really hard to get at. But I wanted to surface this as kind of an alternative to connected papers because I find it very interesting and it's much more graphic. I can, with this graph of similar work, I can see the bigger papers, the ones that have more citations, who have been cited by more people. And it helps me to, I can also alter this and change it into a timeline view so I can look at where this fits on the publication timeline. So I like both of those things. And connected papers, I'm sure, does something similar to ResearchRabbit, but ResearchRabbit is free. The other thing that I like about ResearchRabbit, and I'm just going to back out of this, is I can connect it up into my Zotero collection and my Zotero application. And I use Zotero as my citation management tool, and it integrates really nicely with ResearchRabbit. So I think that makes it extremely interesting. And kind of one that I really wasn't planning on showing, but yesterday I was at a conference that convinced me that I should probably do something about this. So illicit.org, I'm just going to grab this, Carolyn, and I'll pop it into the chat. This is really interesting. If you look at the FAQ here, it tells you a little bit about what illicit is and what it's doing. It's calling itself a research assistant, and it is using a large language model like ChatGPT. In fact, it's using GPT-3, which is what ChatGPT uses, to automate the research workflow. So workflow that it's concerned with in illicit is the workflow for a literature review. And I find that kind of fascinating. This FAQ is filled with all kinds of wonderful information. So it will take a natural language query. I'm just going to grab one. It's one that Carolyn uses a lot in her teaching, and I love it. It is Does excessive cell phone use impact with mental health outcomes such as depression and anxiety among young adults? So first you'll see this. I can brainstorm. This is already a pretty good question, but if I wanted to pop in a few ideas, I can click on this little thing and it will help me brainstorm research questions. So if you're not, you want to do a topic on this kind of thing, but you're not too sure about the question, this will help you kind of brainstorm questions. I'm just going to let it do the search. So here, what it does is, unlike ChatGPT, I want to be perfectly clear about this, ChatGPT will not provide you with accurate citations. Rarely does it provide you with, so don't use ChatGPT for this. Don't use Elicit if you're going to do it. So they surface papers, and it's based on content coming out of Semantic Scholar, which is an openly available database. It includes citations, obviously, so you can tell that it's doing some citation work here. What I find particularly interesting is it's ranked everything for me. It's giving me a summary of the abstract. So it's not actually giving me the abstract, it's summarizing it. So it's using the large language model to analyze that abstract and give me a 2 to 3 sentence summary of it, which I find interesting. And then over here, it's giving me a summary of the top 4 papers based on the large language model and on the content that is found within these papers. So thinking about doing a literature review, I don't know how accurate this is, but it's using real citations. So for me, that's kind of got it over on ChatGPT and other similar things. And I find this idea, this summary or ability to do summaries or summarizing things very intriguing. So I wanted to throw that out there as something people should maybe explore and have a quick look at. So quick related articles, what I would like you to do on your own is find your favorite database, do a quick search on any topic that you're interested in. If you want something that's very generic that should show up in almost every database, just do carbon. And then look on the results page and see if you can find a related articles more like this, find similar or suggested sources, and see if you can figure out how those lists are created, because that would be interesting. So today, I think that citation tracking is a fast way to identify relevant literature. Carolyn's popping before you go, because I realize that we're at time. There's an evaluation in the chat, so before you go, if you could just click on that link before you go, and feel free to leave an evaluation there. I think there is some potential for bias, so I think citation tracking is probably best used in conjunction with traditional literature searching to remove bias, if that is a concern for you. There's no one tool which is best for citation tracking, so it's best to use multiple tools. I think it's ideal for writing, especially narrative reviews, especially background sections, the literature review portion of your thesis. And these are the example papers and references. And I'd like to say thank you for your kind attention.